So today I'm joined by Phil from SHIPMAX. First things first, Phil, just quickly introduce yourself and SHIPMAX as a business.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Phil Rees. I'm the founder and CEO at ShipMax. We are a supply chain consultancy business that kind of sits somewhere between the brands and the retailers and the solution providers, ultimately trying to help brands unlock or resolve any friction or issues or bottlenecks that they have within their supply chains.
So when you're trying to fix those issues and plug those gaps, what do you look for when, say, you're pairing a business with a specific fulfillment partner? If you could just walk me through that process.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a process that I think a lot of brands trip up in. Um, One of the things that I've come to learn with 20 years in the industry is that, the 3PL space is the exact opposite of a one size fits all. So the first stage for us is always to scope out very deeply what the brand are looking for in a 3PL partner, find out where they are on their journey, understand what their stock profile looks like. We basically run through all the questions that a good 3PL salesperson would ask. And then we build up quite a detailed profile of the brand. So we gather a lot of that information through having calls with the brand, but then also by doing our own desktop research. We look at things like Experian and things like, Companies House and Trustpilot and their social media profiles. So we try and build up a really detailed picture of the brand itself. And then all the 3PL partners that we work with very, very closely and tightly. So we know that they're a safe pair of hands for the brands that we introduce. And we try to make sure that we've got coverage for all niches, all types of service requirements, and yeah, try and sort of, well, we're building a network of 3PL partners that ultimately can serve any brand or requirement set that comes our way. That's the end goal. I wouldn't say we're completely there yet, but we're well on the way.
So you obviously work with a lot of different brands, a lot of different partnerships. When you're matching those two sides of the coin together, what makes a good partnership with, say, a specific brand and a certain fulfillment provider? What do you look for, the signs to match those two sort of different parties together?
Yeah, the first is often the kind of size of the opportunity. So, 3PLs can largely be grouped into three buckets. You've got your sort of what I would call your local heroes, your sort of independent owner operated warehouses who run a tight ship, have a good control over their processes, but are quite what I would call like startup friendly. So willing to work with early stage brands or those brands who may be on their sort of first, second, or third stock turn and are still kind of learning the game themselves. Then you've got what I would consider like the mid-tier 3PLs who are often still single site, but sometimes multi-site, maybe a bit more sophisticated setup, able to do things, that the smaller, more independent guys wouldn't be able to do. Some of those partners might have multiple territories that they cover. So, primary warehouse in the UK, but then maybe a second warehouse in the Netherlands or the US. So size is a big thing. There's no point in us taking a startup to an enterprise level 3PL because they're just going to, neither party's going to do well out of that. Um, we look at the operational capability required, so is it all direct to consumer or is there some omni-channel sort of, B2B fulfillment that needs to happen? We look at the type of goods and always try and make sure that the 3PLs we're matching the brand to have existing customers with a similar stock profile and similar sales profile. And then the kind of the due diligence that often gets missed by the brand as well is looking at the kind of the 3PL's financial health. So it's quite an expensive subscription for us, but we have Experian Business Express. So any brand or 3PL we're engaged with, we can immediately go over to Experian and have a look at their financial health as well. We've seen some high profile cases of 3PLs going bust in the last sort of year or 18 months. I won't, I'll spare everybody's blushes by mentioning them by name, but I've often been the guy over the years that people call when they get that awful news on a Friday that their 3PL's going into administration. And
Yeah.
usually what happens is the 3PL leave it to the very last minute to tell the brands that they work with that that's happening, because they don't want to scare them. So then you inevitably end up with a very short window of time where you've got to get the stock out of the warehouse and into a new warehouse before it gets wrapped up in that administration process. So we're very big on the financial due diligence as well. So, in headline terms, the things I say to a brand that they need to kind of consider, there needs to be an operational consideration. Can the 3PL do everything you need them to do? That's obviously important. There's a commercial consideration. Price, nobody wants to sell on price, but price is always a factor in the decision. So, can they meet your expectations operationally? Can they meet your expectations commercially? But also another bit, which again, I think sometimes or often gets overlooked, is is there a good culture fit between the businesses? Are they aligned in terms of the values and the ways that they operate, the ways that they communicate? For some brands, it's super important that their 3PL is on Slack, for example, and some people 3PLs run Slack, some don't. So I say, we try to make sure there's a good match commercially, operationally, and culturally. If we get all of those three things right, then there's usually a really high success or high chance of success that matchmaking is going to be good for both parties.
Yeah, and obviously during that process, you'll have a lot of conversations with brands, with partners. Um, I want to look at today and the conversations that you've perhaps been having in the last few months. What are
Okay.
the main talking points or questions you repeatedly ask? What are the things that constantly come to the surface? So let's say in recent times.
Yeah, I mean, I've got bits of paper all over my desk from brands and 3PLs that I'm speaking to at the moment. So there's plenty that's fresh in the mind. I think the big, last year the big news was Trump and the tariffs, and people having to examine their cogs, with duty in the mix that was never there before. That forced a lot of brands to think about splitting their inventory and having stock in more than one place, because really up until Trump and the tariffs, the kind of the typical way to serve the US from a UK brand's perspective was from your UK warehouse, because it was cheap, delivery was fast, there was minimal customs clearance that was needed to get your parcel to the consumer. Obviously, that all turned on its head last year and caused a lot of activity in the market, and we're about to see a similar level of disruption in the European Union. So 1st of July, a load of low value parcel changes come in, where all of a sudden, parcels that would have cleared with an IOSS reference are now going to attract duty on a per HS code level. And I don't think a lot of the brands are fully awake to what this is going to mean for them over the course of the next sort of 6, 12, 18 months. So I definitely think we'll see a surge of activity there. Recently what else? Recent example of a ladies fashion brand that went into a very large 3PL, and this is not a huge retailer, sort of founder operated retailer. They ran Limworks as well as their Shopify store. They moved their stock into a large enterprise level 3PL. I'm surprised the 3PL even took them with the order volumes that they have, but they did. And then they ran into a load of difficulties around integration, because that enterprise level 3PL didn't have really dev resources to allocate to this retailer to get their stock to sync through Limworks with the 3PL systems. So the brand themselves then had to employ some external developers, and I think over the course of the last 6 months spent about $5,000 on IT costs trying to get their data to sort of be organized in the way that this 3PL system can accept it, because they didn't have a natural integration with Limworks in place already. And I think that they're about less than a year, maybe 6 or 8 months into that relationship, and now they've kind of come to us to say, look, this just hasn't worked. we're spending more and more money on IT each month, and so we're now, at the beginning of an exercise where we'll help them to find 3PLs who are natively integrated with Limbworks, are a bit more culturally aligned to them in terms of size and shape, and yeah, and so those are some recent things. Number of overseas brands bringing stock to the UK for the first time, so that's a big area for us. We try and attract a lot of overseas retailers into the UK market. So yeah, a few recent examples.
Lots of things. Yeah, yeah, good.
Yeah,
I do want to revisit the iOSS stuff. Obviously, as
yeah.
we're speaking today, we're in early June. These regulation changes are literally just around the corner.
Yeah.
Um, I'd like to get some sort of insight into the industry feeling around it, and in your opinion, are brands potentially not being proactive enough with these changes just around the corner?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. And it's no different to how it was with Brexit 5 years ago or 6 years, nearly 7 years ago, 6 years ago. Uh, Often, I mean, there are, all of our marketing activity is on LinkedIn, as you know, because we're primarily a B2B business. There are carriers and service providers on LinkedIn that are talking about this topic, and I've been probably one of the most vocal on it over the last year or so. But I'm not the only voice out there. I don't think it's really garnering the level of attention that it deserves. I mean, to give you an example, I went and presented to a ERP systems provider's sales and account management team, a marketing team. And again, I won't mention them by name, but this was last week, and there were 15 to 20 e-commerce professionals in the room. It doesn't directly affect them or their software because they're an ERP systems provider ultimately, but none of the people in the room are even aware that these changes were coming down the road in a matter of weeks rather than months at that point. So I think that kind of says it all as a bit of a bellwether for the industry as a whole. I think when parcels start to get held, or when invoices take a massive sharp turn upwards on all the European orders, that will be when we see a scramble of activity of people going, okay, we need to really look at this now and see, because I think it's been misreported in a few places. Like, a few places have referred to it as a €3 surcharge per parcel. It's not that. It's €3 per unique HS code in the parcel. So if you've got a parcel that contains a t-shirt, a hoodie, and a baseball cap, those are three completely different chapters of HS code, which means that's a €9 surcharge, not a €3 surcharge. And then come November, this isn't written in law into this European statute at the moment, but it's looking highly likely that they'll also over the top of those €3 charges, they'll apply another €2 of processing. So that could ultimately mean that 3-item parcel come November, December, so basically come peak 2026, could be attracting a €15 surcharge before you've looked at the transport cost, the cost of the goods, the returns and all of those kind of costs as well. So yeah, I'm really surprised it's not garnering more attention in the public domain, to be honest with you, but we'll continue to put content out about it over the course of the next few weeks and months. And yeah, I fully expect that, come September, when, people have had their summer holidays, returned to work, maybe got their first few invoices where these surcharges are going to start showing up. That's when I think, we'll see a real surge of activity.
Yeah, and you talk about these surcharges, potentially more coming towards the end of the year, transport costs. Um, When does stock localization in the EU? You mentioned it was a potential viable option for the US last year when the
Mm.
whole tariff conversation happened. When is that a viable option? What kind of brands should be looking into this? Especially for UK retailers operating at a larger scale, shipping a lot of items into the EU. These are potentially massive costs that are going to be introduced to them throughout this year. So when does that become an option where brands should sit and think, if these these legislations are going to come into place, these extra costs we're going to have to absolve somehow. Like how does stock localization potentially solve that issue, and which kind of brands should be looking at that?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer. There's so many variables within it, but you know, from a large brand's perspective, if you've already got significant levels of trade within the European Union, I think you need to be looking at it, sooner rather than later, particularly if you're fulfilling those orders on the IOSS model from the UK to the European Union. They're going to be the guys that feel it quickly and dramatically in the first instance. You know, when it becomes right is a tough one. Reason being, if let's say you'd sell two nutrition supplements, yeah, creatine and collagen, and that's your entire inventory, two SKUs, dead easy to just, you know, split that inventory, have some in the UK, some in the EU, maybe some in the US as well. When you're, let's say, a multi-category fashion retailer that sells lots of different brands and lots of different sizes, styles, types of garments, maybe you do shoes and accessories as well as, trousers, shirts, hoodies, t-shirts. So, when you've got that big, broad, vast inventory of products that you sell, then that's when it becomes more difficult. What I always say to brands is try not to consider splitting in a binary sense. You don't always have to have an exact mirror of your inventory in two places. I'm a big believer in the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. And what you'll often see when you do the sort of run the analysis is that 80% of a retailer's orders are generated from 20% of their inventory, right? So what I would say, if that broadly applies to your inventory as a brand, then move the 20% first. Don't worry about having 100% of your inventory in the European Union. If having 20% of the SKUs will satisfy 80% of the European orders, then focus there first, and then build up that inventory over time in the European Union. And it doesn't need to be a binary switch either. Like one of the things another thing that I advocate for doing is set up your European partner, send them some stock to fulfill, and then gradually over time send them new stock and new arrivals. You'll inevitably have some returns land there that are hopefully good for resale as well. So over time you can just kind of build up that inventory month on month and year. So maybe eventually you will end up with a situation where you've got everything mirrored in two places. But it's far less punitive to have a small balance of orders that you still serve from the UK, but the majority of the European orders being served from within the bloc than to incur the surcharges on everything on an ongoing basis. So yeah, there's more than one way to skin the cat, but every retailer's inventory profile is different. Their tech is different. Their size in terms of volume, number of orders, all of those things are different. So the best advice I can give anybody that's considering this is to reach out to us at SHIPMAX and let's have an open and frank conversation about what the best strategy and approach is for your brand, because I can't give you a one size fits all answer.
No, don't worry. I wouldn't expect you to.
Too much of a kind of a spectrum of,
Yeah,
of sizes and shapes of retailers, but it's something that we've helped a lot of brands do. So our inbound email is hello@shipmax.co.uk. If anybody wants to discuss any of this stuff and get some free advice from us as to how they should approach the task, then we're always willing to have those conversations.
absolutely. And potentially another difficult question for me. Obviously, like I said before, you have a lot of conversation with brands. You've got a really good insight into where the industry is now. Over the next few years, how do you see the industry changing? Is there any predictions that you've got for the industry?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, customs compliance and cross-border trading will continue to be tricky. We saw it in America first. We're now seeing it in Europe. Rachel Reeves and the UK government have already said that they're going to do away with the £135 import threshold that we have here, but we're a little bit slower than the Europeans and the Americans, so it's probably going to take until 2028, 2029 for them to abolish that. The reason all of these major markets are abolishing their duty-free thresholds is because of Shein and Temu and AliExpress and all of these Chinese behemoths that have just flooded the market with cheap product. So we'll continue to see that. I think at the moment, I don't think there's been any announcements from any other major markets, but I could certainly see markets like Australia, New Zealand, and other large e-com destinations following suit with that sort of approach. So I think we'll definitely see more of that. That plays to the strengths of businesses like Fulfillment Crowd that can serve a retailer across multiple territories. I also think that AI is going to change a lot of things. How retailers respond to their customer service and Wismo inquiries and all of that. I mean, we're already seeing AI disrupting a lot of those things, and also how they market themselves as well. How brands show up in LLM searches. Up until now, it's all been about SEO and Google and paid ads and all of that. But I think the really smart brands are the ones that probably optimizing their content to be LLM searchable as well. So yeah, I think the one thing we can predict comfortably is lots and lots of change. There's going to be a lot of change. I mean, other things that I think, obviously, environmental stuff, carbon, packaging regulations, all of these are being tightened as well because of the impact on the planet of online sales and distributing products. So yeah, I think we're going to be kept busy for the next few years for sure. I mean, I feel like since Brexit and then COVID, the war in Ukraine, the cost of living crisis, now the latest Middle Eastern crisis as well. I think we've all come to sort of see crisis as the normal in inverted commas. It's and who knows what's around the corner, but I think it's going to continue to be a tough trading environment. People are still feeling the pinch of a lot of the things that have been affecting us financially over the course of the last few years. So I think the retailers are having to fight harder to make their sales than maybe they did 4 or 5 years ago. And it's the ones who can serve the consumer quickly, efficiently, and without friction and without unexpected duty bills and all of those things. They're going to be the retailers that really win over the course of the next few years, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the only constant is change. A wise man once told me.
Yeah, certainly.
Last but not least, Phil. So last question: if a person is watching this from a brand and they are having a tough time with the provider 3PL, and they are looking to make that switch, what's the one piece of advice you would give to a brand before they start that search for a new provider?
Well, you've really teed me up for a shameless plug there, to be honest with you, Ryan. It's to talk to SHIPMAX, of course. I mean, we support them for free. They literally have nothing to lose. And, our model's quite disruptive because there are other businesses out there that will introduce a brand to a 3PL and do so, in a similar way to we do, but very differently. I mean, we provide the service free of charge to the brands because we're ultimately being looked after by a small but tightly, monitored partner network who pay us a subscription each month. When I look at the competitive landscape, most of the other introducers, they're charging 2-3 times what we charge for a subscription each month. And then they're also typically taking anything between 3 and 5% as a commission from any successful deals that transact between brands and 3PLs. We don't take any commission at all because I don't want the brand to ever feel like they're commercially disadvantaged by having SHIPMAX in their corner when they go to market. We do not cut a penny out of those contracts. So every penny that the brand spends with the 3PL is between the brand and the 3PL. But, in terms of the shameless plug aside, I think, and I've posted about this a lot on LinkedIn, 3 things any brand can do relatively easily. One is go and visit the shortlisted 3PL providers and walk the warehouse floor, have a look at how they operate. Is it tidy? You know, does everything look like it's where it's meant to be? If you run your finger along the racking, is it dirty or is it clean? You know, because if it's dirty, you can guarantee your product's going to get dirty at some point. So just a visual check on the place is a massive thing, because that'll, you know, even just their attitude to health and safety. You know, do they give you a pair of safety boots and a high vis vest before you set foot in the warehouse? Or do they just invite you in willy nilly in your trainers and your polo t-shirt? Because if they do, you know, I always say, if they've got a relaxed attitude towards health and safety, then they've probably got a relaxed attitude towards their SLAs as well, which isn't going to help you as a brand. So that's number one. Number two is to check them out financially. You know, if you don't have access to Experian for Business, but you're in the last stages of 3PL selection and, you know, you want to get a health check on their financials, email my team. We'll run a credit check on your 3PL. We have that tool. But if not, then get somebody from your finance team or somebody with an accountancy background to go through their books on Companies House and just have a look, see if there's any glaring liabilities or worrying things there in their financial health. And then the third and final thing, which I'd really advocate for, is to talk to some of the 3PL's existing customers, right? The sales guys are always going to tell you they're the best thing since sliced bread and everything's wonderful. If you talk to a few of their customers, you might get a slightly different picture. And the other thing is, when you talk to those customers, make sure those customers are like you. You know, if you're a direct-to-consumer Shopify brand that sells ladies' dresses, there is absolutely no point in you talking to an Amazon FBA seller that sells mobile phone cases and charging leads, right? It's not an apples for apples comparison. So, you know, go and see them, walk the warehouse floor, make sure they're financially healthy, and then talk to some of their existing customers who have a similar sales and kind of SKU profile to you. You know, those are about the three best bits of advice I can give any brand to just at least level up their 3PL selection game. But if they don't want all the hassle of doing all of those visits and they haven't got the tools to do it, then we can do all of that for them, and it's a free service.
Perfect. Great. Thank you very much, Phil. And just for those who have made it to the end of the video, the full video will be on YouTube. Do you want to just tell people how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, easiest way is by email. It's hello@shipmax.co.uk. So that's HELLO@SHIPMAX.co.uk. You can reach out to our team that way. We're also very active on LinkedIn, so feel free to give me a connection request or give the SHIPMAX company page a follow. We try and put useful content out on LinkedIn as much as possible as well, so it's definitely worth signing up to our newsletter and giving the company page a follow as well. And yeah, if you want to check us out on the web, we're shipmax.co.uk.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time, Phil.
Nice to talk to you, Ryan.